What a treat to have all of you three assembled to
Yeah,
talk
good.
about Elon Musk's crash out. Uh, Zaid Jilani, returning longtime favorite to of the show, my former colleague at The Intercept, an independent journalist. Welcome back. Irami Osei-Frimpong, another recurring favorite. Irami, what's the status of your PhD program now? I realized I haven't checked in with you for a while.
I am ABD. I'm
Oh,
still writing.
excellent.
Yes, yes.
Okay, wonderful. I come from a family that has with a matriarch who celebrates her ABD status from 1980, who knows what. And she loves to talk about how you don't actually have to finish your PhD. LOL. And Q, welcome back. We have a stacked roster of favorites. Q, how are you identifying yourself in these internet streets these days?
I'm independent journalist. I have been inactive for a little while, just as I'm recovering from an injury that you might have heard about a little bit ago. But I'm good. I'm good. I'm actually up and walking again, and undergoing physio. Yeah, but I'll be back writing in the new year.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear it. I realized as I introduced you all that this is a weirdly alphabetical group of people between Zed, I, Remy, and Q.
A and then B. Yeah.
And B, I guess that's true. So let's get right into it. We are assembled because we have been experiencing for about a week now a really fascinating development on the right. It's very online. It involves Elon Musk and a division within conservative politics centering around this question of H-1B visas. I want to not be talking this whole episode since there's so many of you. What is one of you interested in sort of setting up how this fracture in the Republican Party, at least the online Republican Party, started to emerge?
I think that, yeah, I can lay out
Go for it, Irby.
the land. All right. So I think there's the topography of this debate has the more nativist version of the Trump Republicans fighting the more tech-friendly version of the Trump Republicans. And the tech-friendly version of the Trump Republicans want the engineers that they want to build the quality of industrial devices that they think is going to make America great. And the more nativist version of America of the Trump Republican Party thinks America's greatness is tied to its people as they are, without increases in the GDP or anything like that. So we just need to focus on the American people as they are and less on necessarily what will make us bigger and better tech savvy people.
This is a violation of our social contract. And it sounds good. Let's just let more H-1B workers in. But what about the 23-year-old that went to University of Washington and studied computer science at the UW Computer Science Department? Shouldn't he be given preference above someone who could do the work for far less? It is about priorities, and it's not about what Charlie Kirk wants. It's not about what other people want out there. And I have friends on both sides of this debate. It's very simple. It's what the American people wanted. And the American people overwhelmingly voted for less immigration and the prioritization of the American children and the American worker, not the American oligarch.
And yeah, and so that I think is an interesting dichotomy between people who think America's greatness is in its culture and potential cultural progress, or America's greatness is in its industry and its potential industrial progress, which, depending on where you think American identity is, that's the merit. That's going to be the standard of what merits a great American and to chart the path forward for what makes a better America. So, yeah.
Yeah, Zed, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that was a pretty good summary. I do think that it's also like showing how appointing Elon and Vivek to this like kind of quasi committee or organization that advises the government but isn't a real government position and has no real power, but they can still like sway the debate on things just by like voicing their opinion because they have this title and they have this relationship with Trump. It's also like an early test of how that works, right? Like, how do these unelected people get to weigh in on what the government's going to do? So, that's another angle to it.
So just to step back for a second, for people who aren't aware of what H-1B visas are, they are visas that are extended generally to tech companies use them more. Uh, PMC class, I guess you could frame it, visas to get foreign workers into the United States of America. Um, and the question is, one of the central questions that I think there's a lot of debate on is whether or not there's an actual need. So we've framed this up as do you care more about kind of industry and the ability for a company like Tesla to grow and get the workers that it needs because there is ostensibly a deficit of US workers that can do this job? Or do you care more about just kind of a protectionist attitude and preserving the job opportunities for American workers? But people have been making the case that that is not, in fact, really the contours of this debate, namely because there are, in fact, sufficient U.S. workers to fill these posts, that there have been record layoffs in the tech sector over the last year or so, and that, in fact, this is very similar to the broader immigration debate, which understands that allowing sort of open borders has negative implications for the US job market. And this is ultimately a bid to be able to hire lower workers at lower pay who aren't going to go on strike, who aren't going to rabble rouse because they risk being deported from the country.
So about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Is there a meaningful difference between an illegal immigrant laborer who's undocumented and a guest worker who is documented but is vulnerable? Right, because one of the major problems for an American worker and an American labor force is that undocumented workers are so vulnerable that they're less likely to organize, they're less likely to demand higher wages, they're less likely to demand better working conditions, they're less likely to raise the floor for what an American worker is. And that's the same criticism you can land at the guest worker programs, who are also less likely to organize, less likely to demand higher wages, because if they do any of that stuff, and for some reason, and Netflix is famous for this, they just get fired, then they end up like functionally deported or on borrowed time. So that installed vulnerability as a workforce is the problem, not necessarily the legal versus illegal. And at least in my view, that's the problem. So maybe we should be talking about like getting rid of guest workers, and maybe guest workers is a problem for American democracy, because the workers are not just workers; they're also people and property owners and all of that stuff. So we need to talk about what it means to be a guest worker, because you don't just come over here as a coder. You're also a whole person who buys things and has ideas about things that you might want to share, but you can't share because if you get fired, you might, because if you tick off your boss, you might get deported. So like, I think I might have a problem with guest workers.
This is the part of what's so interesting about this conversation, I think, because you're getting conservatives who frankly oppose the H-1B visa program, less because of kind of labor rights issues, but more because of these kind of nativist cultural arguments that get thrown around, many of which are racist. There's been a lot of anti-Indian smearing and slurring happen on the internet, talking about how these workers are coming from an inferior culture, all of this kind of stuff, which has been really revealing on a number of fronts, right? On one level, there are a bunch of kind of liberals who are eager to point out that Republicans who argue that their concerns about immigration weren't about race, but were in fact about kind of the worthiness of the immigrant, have had that sort of exposed by the extent to which these are as worthy, quote unquote, immigrants as you can get in terms of being highly educated, having jobs, contributing to the economy, blah, 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 blah. But there's still an antipathy for them, apparently based on them being sort of, quote unquote, culturally unfit. At the same time, though, there is what's fascinating about this to me is that we're kind of walking up, you have all these conservatives kind of walking up to making what are ostensibly left arguments about the labor interests of American workers, about the use of foreign workers to drive down labor, about how less competitive American workers are because they have student loans and therefore need to be paid higher rates. And the fact that there is this willingness to tip-top right up to the edge of these arguments does sort of start to feel like it's a little bit of an opportunity for the left here. Am I being overly optimistic? How are you feeling about this, Q?
If you want to get an idea as to what this looks like over the long term, just look north across the border to Canada, because we've been through this. So Canada has a fairly lax guest worker program, but it's also incredibly exploitative, and it's developed a couple of cottage industries that not only exploits people in the workplace, but also exploits people in schools and exploits people in the homes where they live. So the issue is that there's a student visa that Canada introduced several years ago, that was sort of the crux behind the immigration boom that happened in Canada between about mid 2019 all the way through this year. So Canada's added basically 4 million or 4.4 million to the population, which is based on the
That's an
country
enormous number of people.
based on the fact that we had 40 million people in the country in the first place. It's a 10% addition. So it's a massive addition to the country on a per capita basis. So the issue is students would come here from India, and many of them they come from all over. They come from Kerala, Punjab, Tamil Nadu, pretty much everywhere. But the problem is it's often advertised to people with lesser means. So it wasn't workers that were coming over here the same as the H1-B visa, which is primarily skilled workers, people that already had an education in tech. They might be engineers, coders. They graduated with degrees in computer sciences. No, this is people who are coming here to learn for the purpose of learning. So once they get here, they'll go to these career colleges, and oftentimes these are basically like ITT or one of those lower class tech schools that offers a diploma of some sort, but it's basically useless upon graduation. So every single school across the board, all the way from universities all the way down to these tech schools, were offering basically just useless paper degrees. They all became diploma mills because they could make money on the higher tuition that foreign students pay. Then they get here after, by the way, having probably paid out the nose and ran themselves into debt to get here in the first place. Then they end up staying in what used to be student housing, but now is just every housing, where they're sharing bedrooms for $800, $900, $1,000 a month in a not just a shared living facility where you have roommates, but literally somebody sharing your bedroom with you. So that it ended up driving up the cost of rent, ends up driving up the cost of tuition for some of these smaller colleges, and they end up taking menial service jobs. So jobs that students would normally take through high school, working at a coffee shop, working at a retail store, etc. Well, these students have to be able to support themselves somehow because they can't get by just on student loans alone, assuming that they even qualify for them in the first place. So all of the service jobs end up going to them as well. And then when they graduate, they have 2 years after graduation to be able to find a permanent job. Sometimes they'll find temporary jobs, sometimes they'll find under the table jobs. But what that ends up doing is exerting a downward pressure on wages in the labor market. So they may end up getting, say, a work contract, could be a year, but the contract has almost no guarantees whatsoever attached to it. And the employers, and these aren't just small and medium-sized employers, these are massive retail employers that are hiring people to work at their IT desks. These are some of the largest retailers in Canada, some of the largest banks in Canada, and they hire these employees that come out of these schools, knowing that they only have 2 years to find a permanent job. And then once that 2 years runs out, they'll just churn them over for the next group that are coming in. And they've been doing this for the past 6 years or so. So once they end up passing out of that 2-year phase, they can either apply to stay here on a different type of visa or possibly get permanent residency, which they will most likely not get because they're not full-time employed. They also don't have the savings and everything else necessary to qualify for permanent residency, or they just stay here undocumented. And that's pretty much a similar situation that's going to emerge in the United States, where you have schools that are jam-packed with students that are there pretty much to be churned out as diploma mill students, rising the costs of rent, lowering the wage for workers, and also making work a hell of a lot more precarious. Now, with the H1-B situation, it's a little bit different because these are people that they're not in danger of being put to work in a textile mill for the most part. These are often middle income, upper middle income people who literally grew up with servants in the household. Like they have domestic workers in the household. These are like petty bourgeois Indians for the most part. They'll come to the United States, and sure, they will work their asses off in many cases, but there's also a lot of cases where they come from upper caste households and they carry that same sense of entitlement with them, which is why they can very openly push this whole tiger mom or tiger parent mentality on the rest of American workers, saying, hey, well, sorry that you can't compete, you just got to catch up with the rest of us. But the issue is they're willing to accept lower pay, they're willing to accept more precarious working conditions. But then on top of that, something that people don't talk about, if you check MSNBC, Bloomberg, etc., they're rife with these stories where, well, a couple of things will happen. One, American-based employers, knowing that they have a captive workforce where their status as a person is pretty much tied to their employment, they will actually prefer H1B candidates from overseas. They will give them preferential treatment in hiring over American candidates. Or B, they'll hire American employees with the objective of gradually churning them over for H1B candidates, oftentimes causing employees to train their own replacements who are coming off of the H1B visa. Companies like Cognizant have done this. Even Indian companies overseas, like Tata Consultancy, will have an American subsidiary that's set up for the purpose of gradually hiring in more H1B visa applicants and then pushing out their American workforce. So on the one hand, I completely understand that there's a nativist and racist tinge to all of this. And a lot of the complaints are coming from the very same people that were saying to Black people just a couple of years ago, yeah, sorry, DEI programs are out the window, time to pull up the bootstraps. They were saying the exact same shit, but now the shoe's on the other foot, and they don't like that very much.
Yeah, DEI for whites is happening. And this is what I'm so sorry. The schadenfreude of this, I can't resist it. This is what makes it kind of delicious for me as a casual observer. You raised this issue of the cultural argument that Vivek is making and some of these people are making, that you just got to tiger mom your way through it, and the American workers just aren't working as hard, they aren't as diligent, they aren't as educated, they aren't as willing to grind, have the grind mindset. This came out in a epic tweet from Vivek Ramaswamy that I want to read into the record, and then I want you guys to respond. Obviously, you guys have read it, but for the sake of the audience. He wrote last Thursday, the reason top tech companies often hire foreign-born and first-generation engineers over Native Americans isn't because of an innate American IQ deficit, a lazy and wrong explanation. Why, thank you so much. A key part of it comes down to the C word, culture. Tough questions demand tough answers, and if we're really serious about fixing the problem, we have to confront the all caps truth. Our American culture has venerated mediocrity over excellence for way too long, at least since the 90s and likely longer. That doesn't start in college, it starts young. A culture that celebrates the prom queen over the math Olympiad champ or the jock over the valedictorian will not produce the best engineers. A culture that venerates Corey from Boy Meets World or Zach and Slater over Screech in Saved by the Bell or Stefan over Steve Urkel in Family Matters will not produce the best engineers. Okay. I can't. Let me do a little bit more. It's so good. Fact, I know multiple sets of immigrant parents in the 90s who actively limited how much their kids could watch those TV shows precisely because they promoted mediocrity, and their kids went on to become widely successful STEM graduates. More movies like Whiplash, fewer reruns of Friends, more math tutoring, fewer sleepovers, more weekend science competitions, fewer Saturday morning cartoons, more books, less TV, more creating, less chillin', more extracurriculars, less hanging out at the mall. Okay, that is only about 3/5 of this post, but I'll stop there. Is this not identical to the arguments that have been made about America's own minority populations, Blacks and Latinos, since time immemorial, now being applied to white tech bros? Go ahead, Irami.
I think he's right in some ways. I think it's very important to understand that he's right, and he is also maybe a little bit gauche and wrong, but also he's right insofar.
What's he right about, Irami? I knew this was going to happen. That's why I brought you on. Come on, Irami, hit us with it. Why is he right?
Yeah, I think. Look, I've been on my podcast and on my show. I've been very clear. I think liberal whites are the worst parents in the United States, and family culture matters. And we need to take this seriously. And we need to take this seriously. And insofar as we've been told that we can judge adults by how much money they make, and we can judge kids by their grades and their scores on tests, Indian Americans are better Americans than non-Indian Americans because they make more money as medium and they score better on the test as medium.
That's a huge if, Irby. The pushback is that you can't obviously judge people.
I don't know that you could really. I don't know. I don't know that you could really boil that down to parenting though, because who are the Indian Americans that we're talking about here? There's been exactly. There's been an Indian American population in North America since the 1600s, basically. But that's not generally who we're talking about. We're not talking about people that came over here as migrant workers to help build cities, roads, railroads, etc. We're talking about people that came over here as immigrants. Maybe their parents came here, their grandparents came here. They had the money to get here in the first place. They had the means, and oftentimes they were just the richest of the rich. in India. So they have plenty of time available. Like their children aren't not doing sleepovers because they have a higher work ethic. They're not doing sleepovers because they already have sort of a built-in community structure, and they've got a whole lot of support. They've got private tutors, they've got after-school classes. They have every means of being able to pass those tests with flying colors. Whereas that's just not the case with most Americans because most Americans aren't stunningly rich.
Also, Vivek Ramaswamy is a great example of this, right? His mother is a doctor, famously part of his get-rich-quick scheme to launder this Alzheimer drug that had failed its clinical trials as the next best thing, which is why we even have heard of him in the first place. He is someone who is not, in fact, a STEM person, right? He is someone who went to Yale Law School after graduating from Harvard undergrad. And so it seems very much to a lot of us like he's talking out both sides of his mouth. Moreover, a lot of the examples that he gives seem to, in the eyes of many critics, reflect a fundamental misunderstanding and a kind of a caricature of American culture. Some folks pointed out that, in fact, on Saved by the Bell, Zach had way higher SAT scores than Skeeter. That actually, we loved that he was a smart jock, and that this idea of smart people who also had, high emotional intelligence, high EQ, can move through the world and be kind and decent and fun and athletic was part of the American ideal, that it's not this one or the other. And it seems like a sort of a revisionist history to say something like, we all love Stefan Urkel over Steve Urkel. No, we love Steve Urkel. He's the star of the show. And as I understand it, as I've heard from interviews with the actor Jaleel White, he was the one that got tired of being Steve Urkel and kept pushing for more Stefan Urkel episodes. That is not what the public wanted. That is not what we craved. We love our dork king, right? So I see you nodding your head, Zed. What do you make of all of this?
Well, what's funny is like, okay, so like I like to go to anime conventions, right? Like that's one of my hobbies is like cosplaying. And like I go to
cosplay as Zed.
I have a few different. No, yeah, I'll show you later. I have a few different ones, but look, like okay, so like when you go to
I can't wait to see your Evangelion.
no, like
when Vivek
when Vivek says that Steve Urkel was like kind of a failure and people didn't want to emulate him, I'm like, dude, there's like so many black nerds. Like there are so many black nerds. Like half
I've
these
literally dressed up as him for Halloween before, as a
like there are so many, and there are also like tons of black tech workers now, and like so on and so forth. So like I feel like Vivek is kind of his thinking is a little bit outdated, right? It's very much like probably what his mom or auntie like lectured him with in the 1990s. And maybe there was some truth to it in the 1990s in that there probably wasn't as much American investment in this sector. But actually now we have too many STEM workers in some cases, right? Like tech has had a lot of contraction in the past year or so. There are a lot of unemployed people who have computer science degrees or engineering degrees or so on and so forth. So like even Elon saying that like we don't have enough engineers. I mean, sometimes that's true. But it depends on market conditions, right? Like there was a story in Electric this morning, which is like a online publication that covers the EV industry that interviewed Tesla workers who said, "Hey, look, thousands of us were laid off in the past year, and then Tesla replaced some of us with H1-B visas, right, with the workers, right? Because part of this is just about getting cheaper people, right? Like they tend to have not only are they a little bit more compliant because of their immigration status, but like you can save a lot of money as a company by hiring." These workers are here for a certain amount of time under certain conditions versus people who are going to be lifers who are going to be vested with all your benefits and everything for a sustained period of time. So yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit more complicated than what he's saying. That isn't to say there's no truth to it. Like, I think Irami is right when he says that, like, look, like certain cultural beliefs and behaviors and practices do produce certain outcomes, right? Like, I've tutored kids on the side for like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now. And it's funny, no matter where I am in the United States doing it, I did in DC area, I did in the Atlanta area. Majority of my clients are Asian. And it's weird because it doesn't match up to the demographics of the area at all. And like rich white folks will not do that as much, right? As like Asians who have half the family income will be doing it much more than the rich white folks will. And I think it's just because, look, that has been their kind of their path to success. It's been their path for survival for a lot of them. And that's what their families emphasize and want to do. It doesn't mean that like there's something about India or China or Taiwan or South Korea's culture that's like inherently superior to America, though. Like the people who come here are usually a sliver of those societies, right? Like it's the most ambitious, the most go-getting people. It's not easy to like immigrate from one of those countries to America. You have to jump through a lot of hoops. So the people that land here are the parents who've jumped through all the hoops, right? So like they will not necessarily be representative of the average person in New Delhi or in Hong Kong or any of these other places. It's actually people who've already shown that they're kind of like a cut above, like they really are go-getters. And so it's not really a surprise that they're pushing their kids really hard because like they themselves had to push themselves really hard just to get here in the first place. And so like, yeah, we could learn something from that, but at the same time, like there are downsides to that culture, right? Like I did a piece, I think it was in 21 for Deseret News, which is a really cool newspaper with a big online presence in Utah. And it was about the Indian American dream. So I interviewed tons of Indian Americans like all over America. And like, yeah, a lot of them were like, yeah, like our parents pushed us really hard. That probably helped us succeed. But they were also like, yeah, a lot of kids have mental health issues. They have self-esteem issues. They are perfectionists. I talked to one therapist who told me like she talks to tons of Indian kids who are always like a wreck because their parents push them so hard. And it's funny, like one way she convinces her clients to let her parents' clients to let them come is by saying, "Oh, if you let them have therapy, maybe I can improve their studies or their grades." Right? Like she has to make that argument to them, right? Just to get them to agree to let her do the therapy with them. So like there are downsides to this culture, and I think part of it is just like a lot of like older Indian or Chinese parents, either they or their grandparents lived under like famines, wars, like extreme economic and political instability. I think for a lot of people, it's like a survival instinct, right? Like you have to
That's all
push your
over the
kids
place
super
then.
hard.
Wait a minute, wait a minute. We just finished saying that these people are the most elite and able and resourced who are able to come over here in the
No,
first
no, no,
place.
no.
And
We
now
did
we're
not
gonna
say that.
flip to an argument.
And it's not true that they're the most resourced. It's not true that's like a progressive cope. They're not the most resourced. A lot of them are very
Well, no,
poor
I,
when
I
they get to
certainly
the
don't
United
think
States.
I don't think that's always the case. But
They're
disproportionate.
ambitious. They're ambitious, right? Across any population of people, some people are like go-getters. They want to go out there and do stuff. Other people don't want to do stuff. The most go-getters from like China or India are coming here, and
So
that's a big
let me
difference because they
complicate
don't
this for a
necessarily
second.
have more money, but they do have like a different attitude, right? That's any population of people in the world. Any society in the world has people like that, right?
Let me complicate this for a second. So earlier you told us an anecdote about your personal experience tutoring kids, observing that the wealthy white kids didn't seem to be seeking out tutoring services as much as Asian Americans of lesser economic means. Two thoughts sprung to mind. One, whether or not Asian Americans are self-selecting for having an Asian American tutor. I know that's a thing, a lot of us want Black doctors, but want to keep it within the community. And two, this statistic that I came across actually earlier today, which noted that 43% of Harvard's white students were admitted through what researchers termed an ALDC status. That's athletics, legacy, dean's preferences, and children of faculty. That was between the years of 2014 and 2019. The study went on to say that 75% of those students would have been rejected without their ALDC status. Might it also be that white kids realize that they don't actually have to have as high test scores, don't have to jump through the exact same kinds of hoops as lower income Asian kids to get the same results?
I think that's true, but I think that also kind of explains the culture, right? Like the parents have in their minds that like unless they do this, they can't compete with people who have had money for many generations because most of their parents have not been wealthy for many generations, right? Like most of them have poverty. Either their parents were poor at some point or their grandparents were very poor at some point, right? So I think they do have this mindset. Also, another thing you see is that they sign up their kids for like tons of extracurriculars. Like I would meet kids that are doing like 7 or 8 extracurriculars. I ask them like, do you want to do all those things? They're like, no, my mom is making me, right? Because they have this idea that colleges will not accept them. Like they have to be that much better. The research actually shows that like 2 extracurriculars is usually enough for college. Like 7 or 8 is really overkill. But yeah, I think that this is kind of an adaptation. Like this is how you get your foothold into America if you're a foreigner who like doesn't speak the language well, who doesn't have connections, doesn't have a ton of money. But like you have to do all those things. And these are people who already proved they can do a lot because they got to America in the first place, right? Not everybody can just go from Kerala to the United States, right? Like only a small sliver of people will do that. Those will generally be the people who are the most driven, who are the most ambitious. Like I said, the go-getters. And every society has those people. So like that's where I disagree with Vivek. I think Vivek's being a little chauvinistic as if like there's something unique about these cultures. And not really. Like any pretty much immigrant groups from pretty much every single culture that come to America are the most go-getters of those societies, right? Like,
but also not immigrant groups.
Coming from the border, right?
And I want to bring you back in here, Irami. So you're raising your hand, but also not immigrant groups. I got to say that the part of what really bristles me during these conversations and what excited me about the native white American outrage about this is that the narrative around immigrant achievement has always come at the expense of Black Americans. I saw someone tweet about how, was it you actually, Irami? About how there has long been, Black Americans have long been used as a proxy for a battle between Asian immigrants and white natives, whatever you want to call them. And because there are so few Black folks in the tech sector, finally it's coming to be a head-to-head without both sides pretending like that's really about meritocracy vis-a-vis Black people. Now they actually have to have the head-to-head. And white people are upset about being told that they have some cultural deficiency and that's why they're not able to achieve at the same time that we are seeing the statistics about the way that guest workers and H-1B visa holders are used to divide the labor class and to exploit people. Here's one more stat I want to throw in here before I come to you, Irami. Li Fong tweeted this out. He pointed out that foreign workers on special visas, either H-1Bs or OPTs, are taking as many as 25 to 33% of all new IT jobs in America. There's strong evidence, he says, that they are holding down wages. IT jobs grew 20% from 2014 to 2019, but wages rose only 3% during that period, and he has an accompanying graph. Irami, what do you make of this?
So I have 3 kids, right?
Yeah.
And the way I parent them has very little to do with the way I was parented and has a lot to do with me reverse engineering the quality of parenting of the students I met when I was at college. So like there was a cultural deficiency in my parenting that was American produced in my upbringing. That was American produced.
Irami, I'm American and I was raised with math tutoring and being read to every night. And all of the things that everyone is saying is Tiger, a million extracurriculars. I was scheduled up the wazoo. I attended Duke String School as a kid. I did everything. And I went to Harvard and I was in Vivek's class. And so I got to say reductive
But Brianna, you're an
nature of
outlier.
it.
But Brianna, you're a real outlier among Americans, though. Most Americans do not have anywhere near your kind of childhood and upbringing,
because
right?
Because I had privileges that are about the experiences that my mother had. She was a school psychologist at my previous school. She understood the application game. All of these things benefited me. She was a first generation college graduate herself, but I guess maybe in some ways we're trying to reconstruct the way that Irami was reconstructing what she saw for me. And all of that is true. I think my resistance is to the idea that it's tied to culture at vis-a-vis race. That is what becomes, in your
I
words,
don't know that
said,
it has anything to do with. I don't know that it has anything to do with race. I think the issue here is that, and it's the tech people, or rather the nativists are expressing this, and the tech people are just flabbergasted. They can't understand it. Most people don't want to have to do that much shit just to live. That's the long and short of it. The big problem is here, we're acting as if every single person should have the drive and determination to want to out hustle all of their peer competitors and have the best job possible. Everybody should shoot for being a CEO. But that's just not what life is like for most people all over the world. Generally, people want to be able to wake up, sit down for breakfast with their family, see their kids off to school, go to work the amount of hours that they agreed to when they signed their work contract, come home, watch TV for a couple of hours, read the kids a bedtime story, and then go to bed themselves. Like that's all people want to do. They want to be able to barbecue on weekends. They want to be able to hang out, have fun, do things that don't involve their life revolving entirely around their work. But the issue is these people in the tech industry have so bought into their own line of thinking, their own ideology, their own tech futurism, that they think everybody should be plugged in all the time, that everybody should be trying to out-hustle everybody else. That's not how they live. They would like you to think that, but that is just not how they live. Everyone thinks that Elon Musk running 6 or 7 or 8 or 10, I don't know how many different companies that he runs, he's not actually running it. Essentially, he's just overseeing production for all of these companies. That is not how he lives. That's not how his peers live, but that's how they want the average American to live. And I think the nerve that they struck for a lot of these MAGA nativists is that they don't want to live like that. That's not how their lives, growing up, that's not how they saw their lives shaking out. That's not how they want their lives to be. But they see that their lives are being forced in that direction by people that are degrading the standards of the labor market.
I think that's such an important point. If I were to also just frame it a little bit differently, it feels like we all know as leftists that there are all these kind of systemic barriers, that we have top 6 people in the country that have more wealth than the bottom 6%, that someone like Elon Musk denies it, but it is true, inherited this emerald mine, or his father had this emerald mine and had all this wealth, that he used to buy Tesla. He didn't start anything from the ground up. And now these people that are incredible elites who ran scams like Vivek Ramaswamy to earn their money, turn around and tell the rest of the masses that they are culturally unfit, that they're undeserving, that they're not hustling hard enough. And the cherry on top is someone like Vivek saying, and if you hustled as hard as someone who's coming from another country where they have many fewer opportunities, then you too could succeed. And no one's asking the question, well, do we really want it to be that kind of a dog-eat-dog world? Isn't the whole point of America, to your point, Q, that you should be able to have a chicken in every pot and a reasonable middle-class lifestyle without working 80 hours a week? And this is, again, what seems like such an interesting opportunity for the left to demonstrate why our analysis is so superior to that of the right. You have Matthew Knowles. You know Matthew Knowles? He's one of these conservative commentators. He tweeted a few days ago, tired, meritocracy is bad. Wired, meritocracy is good. Inspired, the very notion of meritocracy conceals a conception of justice in politics that is dubious upon close inspection. Wait, is he doing CRT?
I was just going to say that's critical race theory.
Like, this is one of those, I'm pretty sure he's like a hardcore anti-CRT, anti-woke, blah, blah, blah guy. But they're all kind of coming to this realization when it's now white Americans.
We just got white Derek Bell. That's crazy.
Exactly.
It's funny.
So what do we do with this? We have people like Laura Loomer out here again doing like these woke discourses. Again, not totally woke. She's being like super racist while she's doing
No,
it.
she's being right-wing woke is what it is. She's a woke right-winger.
How would you describe that? What is right-wing woke, Q?
Right-wing wokeness. Their third eye has just decalcified. Like their third eye has just opened up, and they're now starting to see the world for the way it is, and not like they don't have the blinders over them. So now they're drinking like peanut punch, and they're drinking the mineral water and whatnot to decalcify themselves. And seriously, they're going to be drinking rainwater. They're already on the anti-fluoride trip, but it's going to be so much worse than that. Now they're actually seeing that there is a class divide. They're actually starting to understand that there's rule by elites, and the people that they thought were elite previously were generally like coastal academic liberals. Now they're beginning to understand that the actual true elite are the corporate and financing overlords. The people that they previously used to look up to and worship, they're now beginning to understand, hey, wait a second, the world that they envision for themselves doesn't include me. I'm just a cog in the machine. I'm just a battery to be plugged in. What they're actually waking up to is that there is a tangible and variegated class difference or differences in class interest. Whereas for them, being working class people, they don't intend on being CEOs. They don't intend on commanding multi-million or multi-billion dollar salaries. They want to have a comfortable life, raise their children, and be able to have, fun Christmases 30 or 40 down the road with their grandkids. They don't aspire to be tech overlords or finance overlords. But what they're seeing is that these tech and finance overlords have essentially gotten together since the late 1970s and in the 1980s. It's actually really interesting that Jimmy Carter has just passed away, where he was essentially the one that ushered in this neoliberal age that we're in right now, with massive deregulation, financialization of almost every industry, and then shipping work either south or overseas. What they're beginning to understand is that they don't fit into the grand scheme of American labor practices. Essentially, their jobs are going to be so far abstracted away from being able to actually make anything that is of tangible value. They're just going to be sitting at a desk, working a useless email job, or simply unemployed altogether because everybody from overseas is going to be brought over to work those useless email jobs. That's right-wing wokeness. But the way that they express it is not through talking about class differences. They're not talking about exploitation of labor, etc. They're talking about they want us to be a bunch of street shitters.
Although I will say some of them are getting pretty close. Tell me, who do you think said this, Noam Chomsky or Laura Loomer? The biggest threat to our country, our freedom and humanity, is the unchecked power of technocrat billionaires who have God complexes, access to defense contracts, and openly declare war against dissenters. This should freak you out.
It's actually kind of wild. She's the one that I think kind of like blew the whole lid off of all of this, because she was the one that just straight up called out Elon Musk and said that he's she called him a stage 5 clinger. He's basically a hanger-on to the incoming Trump administration. And what he's doing essentially is just prying the door open for all of his tech buddies, Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, David Sachs, etc., prying the door open for them to come in and implement their own version of tech futurism in America. But that doesn't leave any room for the ground level people, the people that were there from the very beginning, the prototypical MAGAites. They're pushing people like her out the door. But the way that she expressed it, I think, kind of like struck a nerve in working class MAGA Americans, to the point where they realize, like, wait a second, these people don't really give a shit about us. With the kinds of appointments that Trump was making to his incoming administration, I think what they saw was something that they did not recognize as being originally part of that movement. And it turned them off so much that she was the one that actually gave a voice to, it's a very strange combination of racism and class consciousness. It struck that note with many of them. And that's why there was this huge revolt over the past 4 or 5 days.
There's always been this link between these things too, right? Like going back 100 years, or even maybe even longer than that, right? There's always been some kind of tension in people's understanding of racism and how they think about social class or economic class, because those things are always linked, right? Like if you guys read C. Vann Woodward, C. Vann Woodward was a kind of historian of the civil rights movement. Wrote the Strange Career of Jim Crow, maybe mangling that. He also wrote a book about Thomas Watson, who was the Georgia-based populist who ran on a presidential ticket and then later, started out very, I guess, what we would consider to be progressive, in that he was against lynchings and he would help defend people against lynchings and attack racist laws. But then he became a white nationalist in the latter half of his life. Started blaming, the categories of African Americans, Jews, Catholics, everyone, on other groups for problems. There's always been this tension because the issues are so linked, right? Like, I think that there is a fear from a lot of people. The fear of being replaced is also like an economic fear, right? Like, it's like who's on top in society, who can actually have a comfortable life for themselves. I think a lot of these people on the right who are more on the populist side are thinking, hey, look, like Elon and Vivek, do they just want to bring in people to replace us, to take our jobs, our worth, our dignity, our place in society? It's both a cultural and an economic question to them, right? Like it's not even a separable thing to them. I don't think they think of them as in two different categories. They think of them as one and the same. And I think it always has kind of been that way, right? Because like most people don't mind someone just different than them just being around, right? But if they think that person different than them is going to be taking their position or their power or their chance for a good life, then I think they get more resentful, right? Like I don't think Laura Loomer is kind of a wacko. Maybe she's not the best example, but like maybe just like your median, like kind of MAGA true believer type person has kind of nativist leanings. I don't think they mind like the country of India existing, right? In India, and they don't see it as threatening to them. But they would see it as threatening if, these tech guys are telling them they got to work 80 hours a week to compete with these people. First of all, I don't think anyone really works 80 hours a week. I mean, they're exaggerating, but the underlying,
it's all virtue signaling.
Yeah, like it's no one actually does that. But like, I think the signal being sent to them is basically the Indians are better than you, right? That's kind of what Vivek was saying. He's saying the Indians are better than you. And it's funny because I think like right wingers often say
you
that.
Actually even had some Twitters, like a couple of, I saw at least one, but I know that there's more than one that have expressed a sentiment. A very outward facing, well-known Twitter employee was literally saying, well, what are you going to do, white boy? I outclassed you by every measurable standard. And it pissed people off.
Yeah, it's also
funny because it's funny because I feel like conservatives have often aimed that critique at like inner city minorities like blacks and African Americans and Hispanics. It's funny seeing people on the tech right aim that critique at white people, and then white people be like, "Oh, that's how that feels when someone says that to me." Like, okay,
yes, that's why this is an amazing week. This is the most fun I've had on the internet in a very long time. Go ahead, Irami.
Interject one thing. I think it's about time to bring in JD Vance because first of all, he's going to be the vice president of the United States, and I think his book actually speaks to this in a way that we should kind of take seriously. So the way I read Hillbilly Elegy is what JD Vance saying that, look, my family, they are violent, degenerate, lovable people who are also violent and degenerate and bad at family, but also lovable, but violent and degenerate. I didn't know how bad it was until I went to the military And then two, I met my wife's family who were lovable without being so violent and degenerate. And so we need to figure out a way so that Americans keep their lovability, but be less degenerate. And so that we're better parents, because my culture is not what it could be. And her culture was better. Did I misread the book, Zed?
Well, I think so I think the book is very interesting because I did a lot of press around the book when Vance was picked because I wrote a little bit about it for Compact Mag and like how Vance thinks about the world. And I know Vance is chief of staff. Like I've known him for years. I don't know if he's going to continue to be his chief of staff out of the Senate and into the vice presidency. It probably will be in the administration. And his chief of staff is very interesting because he's like more conservative, like Jewish guy, but he's like very like he's like authentically religious. Like, you know, as a kid, he like campaigned to like improve school buildings, and he was like, so what if we have to pay more taxes? Like, we need to help people. And like he is very kind of heterodox in that regard in the Republican coalition. And that was the first signal to me that maybe Vance has changed his views on some of these things, because I think one way to look at hillbilly elegy is it's like Vance expressing his trauma, right? Like he was personally very upset and aggrieved by, I think, the instability in his family, the instability in his community. And he had a very, I think, personal expression of that in hillbilly elegy. I think as he got into politics, he started to have a more sociological examination of these issues. And he started to shift, I think, away from this is all the issue of personal responsibility and cultural failings of this group of people to, well, there's also these other forces out there. There's everything from globalization, economic, and cultural, and all these things also bearing down on them. So he started to become more defensive towards that group of people. I think particularly as he saw a lot of liberals in the Trump era really attack those people like in a very severe and harsh way, probably much harsher than he did in the book. So like, I think Vance still believes in the cultural stuff, but he's kind of added a political or sociological layer to it, which is maybe him backing off a little bit from what he said in Hillbilly Elegy. But it's interesting. Like in one, I pointed this out the other day, in Hillbilly Elegy, in his book, he actually talks about how when he married his wife, who actually, her parents are from India, that was the first time in his life, really, where he had a family where like everyone in the family was on good terms. A family. Yeah, like they were on good terms with each other. They liked each other. They supported each other. He quotes his father-in-law saying that, you know, he had one relative he kind of had some disputes with, but he was like, I can't cut them off. They're my family. I have to support them. You always have to support them. And like, broadly speaking, that is how South Asians think about family. Maybe to an extreme to some extent. Maybe to an extreme to some extent.
That's how all healthy families think about families. So,
but American families are not healthy.
But no,
yeah, they are. No, the American families are not very healthy. A large.
I'm sorry.
Kicking kids out at 18 years old. Does that make sense to you, Zed?
Wait a minute.
What's so funny when Irami says that, because every Indian or Pakistani parent at some point makes a joke about Americans kicking their kids out at 18 years old because they don't believe in it. They think it's stupid.
My sister was kicked out at 18 years old.
Mine wasn't. I lived at home through a year or two after law school. Like this. This is what's so ridiculous. This is what's so frustrating to me. You went from J.D. Vance writing about a uniquely like for what it's worth, West Virginia in the American imagination is like code for the most dysfunctional, most economically deprived, most low income, like all of the things, all of the problems of America, worst health outcomes, all of the worst stats in America are focused on West Virginia. It's been blighted by the opioid crisis. It's been blighted by an extractive mining industry. It's been blighted for decades and decades and decades. Globalism, all of these things. And then you go, this guy who grew up with a drug addicted mother in this absolutely deprived environment, married a woman with a nice family, and it's because they're Indian. He could have married 80% of American families and had a better experience than what he experienced growing up. So why the need to then attribute the reality that his wife's family is lovely and that was a wonderful safe haven for him to the fact that they're Indian? Like, that's the kind of chauvinism, and coming back to your word, that I think has irritated so many Americans who are it's not because I watched Saved by the Bell. It's just because,
to be fair, Vance does not say that like Indian families are superior or anything. He just explains his personal experience.
You two are saying that. You and Irami are saying that.
Well, let me ask you this, Brianna. Do you think that there is such a thing as culture, that it exists, that there are different cultures, or is everyone basically the same? I guess that's one question. Maybe one difference between us.
I think that the idea of taking a country with 1 billion people in it and saying there is a culture, and the idea on a lesser scale of taking a country with 300 million people in it and saying there is a culture is reductive and makes things less clear and obscures the truth of what's going on in various situations, including the class reality, to take the J.D. Vance example, that is so determinative here.
Yeah, I think
I'm laughing at all this because I live in one, probably like where I live in Canada, because I live very close to Pearson International Airport. And this is basically like ground zero for when people talk about Canada having an immigration problem. I mean, this is ground zero for it, right? So people, when they mention the Indian population in Canada, they always talk about Brampton. And that's very close to where I live. And there's no such thing as Indian culture. I'm sorry, but there just isn't. I like there's shopkeepers very close to me that have posters on their store windows that are promoting Khalistani separatism. My neighbors are students from Kerala. They have a completely different point of view and way of looking at the world than people about 4 or 5 blocks down the road. Whereas they are, from Kerala, they're very left-leaning, they're very working class type people. Go about 5 blocks down the road and you find some of the richest, snobbiest people that you've ever met in your life. And there's a completely different culture to them. So I take your point, Brianna, and I think you're absolutely right. And you can't really say that there's an American culture per se. There are dozens and dozens of different American cultures. Somebody who lives in like Palm Beach or Wellington, Florida, is not going to have the same point of view as somebody from like Sedona, Arizona. Is not going to have the same point of view as somebody from, say, like Eugene, Oregon. It's just not going to happen. There is no unified culture there. But I think what does link them. Let me just one last point. Okay. I think what does link them though is an idea as to what it is that you can accomplish in America if you are willing to work, not necessarily like work yourself 80 hours a week and work yourself to the bone, but if you are willing to put yourself to work, if you are willing to educate yourself, if you are willing to make a little bit of extra effort and network, you'll be able to secure a comfortable middle-class life for yourself. That's what I thought people thought of as the American dream, but that is entirely being replaced in a very globalized culture where everybody has to outcompete everybody else for the right to simply live. And I don't think that that's sustainable long-term.
Because resources are being hoarded at the top, namely, right? Like there's a smaller and smaller pie, and we're told we have to compete at higher and higher levels instead of addressing the structural reality. And it feels weird to me as leftists not to be talking about that. Go ahead.
I think what you guys said, I don't think Irami and I would disagree very much with what you all said. I mean, India is one of the most multicultural societies in the world, right? Like there are so many different languages spoken, so many different religions, so many different ethno-linguistic groups and cultures. So like it's absolutely true. There's no such thing as Indian culture if you really want to drill down into it. That being said, the people who come here, Daisies or South Asians to the US and Canada, they do have some shared cultural traits even while having their individual subgroups. And I think that's kind of what Irami and I are speaking about. And it does give them an advantage in some areas, well, a disadvantage in other areas. I mean, how many Indian American like musicians do you know, or artists, or actors are starting to get there, and like
Nora Jones.
I was gonna say Raj is from my neighborhood, bro.
Well, part of the problem is that
there's Punjabi Canadian rappers that are blowing up right now.
No, you're right, but I guess what I'm saying is, as I think someone on this call mentioned, that there have been like in the 1600s there have been South Asians in the United States, right? But like often. But the latest waves, I think, have focused on very practical industries and fields like STEM, small business, gas stations, motels, blah, blah, blah. And I think they push their children very hard to go in those areas. But then it also leaves them like culturally underrepresented, right? It leaves them underrepresented in humanities, leaves them underrepresented in all kinds of different fields. And so a lot of times, a lot of these kids have had to rebel actually against that culture to say, hey, mom and dad, I understand why you want me to be in the most safe and stable career field. But don't you think there should be more Indian comics? Don't you think there should be more Indian painters? There should be more lawyers. There should be more, so on and so forth. So even these cultures themselves are not
Indian
stable.
Painters and lawyers.
I know, in comics,
Indian
they're
comics?
kind of killing the game. Politicians.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
How about the NBA? Why are Indians only known for the spelling bee and not for sports? Right? Like,
okay, look,
I'm just saying that I'm giving you guys a point here, which is that I'm saying that Indians are like some of the best cricketers in the world. Yeah,
Yeah,
in
and what
India,
I'm
right? In India, right? Because India
probably
gives them
here.
more breathing room.
I mean,
Okay.
I'm sure
Who
to
watches
your
cricket in
American cricket
America?
teams.
Like besides you and me, maybe. Maybe
Well.
the two of us are buying all the tickets, right? Like
Yeah,
look,
I'm of Caribbean background, so it's
there you go.
culturally
There you go.
obligated. Yeah.
the main point that I would just like to get across is that there was a ready acceptance of the idea that obviously there are a lot of different cultures in India and in America. I don't see that latitude being extended to Black Americans ever. So when I say I grew up a certain way, and when I go on to, I will also say that every Black American family that I grew up with was the same. We all lived together in a neighborhood in North Carolina. All of the parents were doctors and in finance. Ended up going to Harvard with a lot of the kids from those families. There were professors at Stanford. Like, I can sit here and name to you 10 families that I grew up with that are exactly like that, who all had this work ethic that is only ever attributed to immigrants, and that is used to justify arguments about cultural deficiencies in Black Americans, when obviously 90% of what we're seeing here play out, including with JD Vance's family, which I have a lot of empathy for, frankly, is class. And so again, coming back to this, the reason why this kind of galvanized the right in this way, I do think it was one of the first times that you saw white Americans being treated reductively and not being allowed to have different kinds of cultures, not being allowed to be framed as having different sorts of incentives and different kind of family structures and yada, 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 and to be reduced to, y'all just don't work hard enough. Y'all just aren't deserving as the other. And that was
They didn't like
really
that.
hurtful.
They
They're
did not
butthurt,
like
they're mad.
They did not like. I do want to say that the working hard bit is a bit of a canard, because I do think everybody works hard and everybody loves their kids. It's just that some people are better at it than others. For example, you can think working hard for your family means going out working 80 hours a week so you can bring home money so that you can pay for other, like the nicer school in the nicer suburb and all of that stuff for your family. And you could say that that's really working hard for your family. Or you could think working hard for your family is like sitting down and grinding through teaching your kid like algebra and long division and calculus and doing all of that kind of direct intervention. Both working hard, but I think takes a different disposition. And in America, I think the former attitude is shined upon in a way that the latter attitude isn't. And also, I think the difference is going to be, in a way, metaphysical, insofar as we think of we can't have these cultural arguments without talking about family. And we think of kids as somehow being independent of their parents and their family units, whereas I don't think that that's both accurate and appropriate. I think kids are products of their family in a profound way that Americans underestimate, that other people don't. Now, I have 3 kids. I have 3 kids, and I've like thought about all this. And honestly, my kids, if you just meet my kids, you think that the reason that they're beating you at all, your kids at all these things, is because that they're special, but they're not that special. We just have a system in this household. My kids are all kind of excellent at everything they do, and it's because of the family system. So really, when you face my kids, when you face the Vivek Ramaswamy, when you face one of these high achieving kids, you're not facing just the kid. You're facing like a family culture that's now like the kid is the avatar of. And you know what those kids do? Beat everybody else who's just doing it as a hobby. Right? So that's why the Indian spelling bee champions are that.
I agree with you, Irami, but like as someone who is that kid, I noticed you said Vivek, but you didn't say me, even though we're in the same class. It's okay, I won't take it personally. But like the reason that I bristle at that is because it is true. And I know because of the enormous privileges that I have in my life that is not how it should work. Like I look at some of these people out there talking about, oh, student debt shouldn't be canceled because I worked hard and da-da-da-da. And I'm like, you don't stand a chance against me. I'm looking at these right-leaning people who are arguing against all of these lefty social programs that are aimed at like equalization, free public college, like let's destroy the Ivy League. They are still thinking that they're going to bootstrap themselves into this tier. And I'm looking at them having gone through the gauntlet. I'm like, you don't stand a chance. I barely made it through. And you're a sucker for trying to maintain the system that you are never going to succeed in because you are already so hamstrung from the beginning. And so, like, it's not that I disagree with you. I'm just questioning why the world works like that. And everyone has to have mentally and socially and well-adjusted parents that can put them through a system, or else the consequence is that you're
Brianna,
living a horrible life.
But let's think
There
about
has
like
to be
the
something
foster care
between.
system, right? Like I've done reporting on foster care, and
Yeah.
most people would consider a lot of it to be disaster, right? Like it's really, really hard to have someone else taking care of kids if their parents can't do it. And I think you're right that a lot of people on the right, or at least in the libertarian right, they don't believe in any kind of government intervention or redistribution to help solve these problems when a lot of it is well-founded and would be justified and would be helpful. But the left also needs to take a couple knocks here, and that's like, it's not like if someone's parents completely suck, the government can just completely make up for it. Like
No,
they
we need to
can't.
build better
Like there's no, they're like it's not
I
even
agree.
remotely possible.
I don't know that I said that.
I think you guys are also talking around something. And Irami, you actually illustrated a very clear divide here. You said that one set of parents thinks that working hard is working hard, going out, working 80 hours a week, bringing money home so that your children can succeed at whatever it is that they want to do. They have the resources for it. And there's the other set of parents who will make sure that their children are drilled in math, English, and whatever other subjects that they want to be able to pursue to their natural end. But what you're applying Protestant work ethic. You're applying that sort of the Calvinist doctrine to either people that are in the administrative class or people in the working class. Like I come from a working class family, right? The guys in my family are all tradespeople. I'm sort of the black sheep here. So I can do trade work, but that's just not what I do for a living. But it was also impressed on me very young. And I also have children myself. Like, you're not the only parent in this conversation here. My children are bilingual. They get very good grades as well. But they're also free to pursue whatever it is that they want to. Now, for people that come from families where there's a highly administrative culture, like in order for you to be able to exercise class mobility, you have to pass a battery of tests to be able to qualify to work in a certain field that you wouldn't think that your family's naturally suited for. You have to go through a barrage of tests, and the process of immigrating to countries like Canada, the United States, UK, etc., are part and parcel of that culture of being able to pass tests. So they think that, even if they come from the working class, they think that for their children to be able to succeed, they have to continuously pass tests. But it may not be their natural inclinations, which is why they're all ending up in therapy, and which is why they're all traumatized by their parents. But the problem is, America has sent, like, it's basically hollowed out its working class core, its industrial core. So that work no longer exists in America. That work is in Mexico. That work is in Uruguay somewhere. That work is in India. That work is in Indonesia. That work is in China. It's gone. So the problem is, for most people that have been brought up with this idea that to be successful in America, you can take your ingenuity and carry it forward into industrialism. So you can work with your own two hands and still make something of yourself, even though you're not fit or cut out for a white collar profession. But that's gone now. And when you talk about, for example, engineers, that's still a profession where people expect to be able to work with their hands, or at least use their minds to create something tangible. But that's also gone. Engineers aren't working in engineering. Engineers are working in tech. They're taking their knowledge of physics and fluid dynamics, etc., and using it to make meme coins. It's no longer being used to make anything tangible. So the problem is, you've just directed the entire workforce towards making nothing that is of any use to anybody for the most part. I think that's not the divide in culture here, where parents are just sending their children towards the wrong direction. That's the American political and labor project has blown up, and there's nothing for anyone to make anymore, and that's why their children aren't succeeding. There's nowhere for them to go.
Yes. And to add on to your point, Q, like I presume, Irami, that when you say you have a system, it's a system for a certain kind of academic, upper managerial success. And there are kids who, for a number of reasons, just aren't well suited to it. But that in our current society, that just means they're like terrible people who are losers and have no opportunity. And I think that is fundamentally a problem, because you don't have these. It's like there's like a donut hole. And you either grind and excel and are a technocrat whose brain works to hold 1,000 things in your brain a day and do all of the emails and all these administrative tasks, or you're poor or you're subsisting in some of these the biggest working class sectors that we have now are in retail service or restaurant service. And those jobs should pay a living wage, and they don't. And we have, as a society, decided to degrade them. And so those aren't real jobs. Those are temporary jobs for high school students or what have you. And so you have this class of people that's stuck in those jobs, perhaps permanently because of the way the world is changing, that we don't want to give a living wage to. And I'm sorry, there's something toxic to me about saying, well, if your kid ended up there, it's because you didn't have the quote unquote the right system to get them into a upper echelon that we know can only hold so many, that we know is so narrow and diminished, that we know is a pyramid scheme, and that we're sort of buying into it by saying, have a better culture and maybe your kid can make it to the top of the pyramid scheme.
I'm not convinced that American kids who I think are culturally deficient are particularly happy either. Because I think confidence comes from competence. And I don't think American parents are particularly good at raising competent kids who can do a lot of things. And when you can't do a lot of things, you're going to have a lot of anxiety and put your dignity in other places. But I do think the tech libertarian answer to all of this is let the people who can earn, who actually come from functional families, earn, and we'll buy everybody else off with a UBI. And that'll be the solution. And I don't think that's a great solution either. I think the solution is helping people make better families. And so,
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the examples is Brazil, right? So Brazil has a program called Bolsa Familia, which is not a UBI, but a conditional cash transfer, right? And the conditions are that you have to be below a certain income, so it goes to poor people. And then you have to make sure your kids attend school a certain amount. I don't know what the percentage is, but they're trying to stop absenteeism, and you have to get them vaccinated, right? So Brazil has had found tremendous success using this program, right? They have gotten millions of kids to improve their behaviors, and also they've sent a lot of money to poor people. Yeah, I guess a certain strand of leftists would be offended by this. Oh, are you saying poor people have to change their behavior? No, we have to fix the system. How dare you blame the victims? Give me a break. Sometimes when I'm teaching a kid, I'm trying to help them, right? I'm trying to with us. I'm trying to improve them. And this program was in Brazil has no controversy at all among leftists. It's really an American leftist thing to not want to help people improve their behaviors.
Ever heard people say positive things about this program. I've only ever heard it characterized.
But let's say we had similar
leftosphere.
Let's say we set up a similar program in America with the left.
Wait,
I don't know.
I don't want to cut off this frolic and detour, because every one of your frolic and detours are fascinating, and that's why I love having this panel. I've been very stimulated. I am more stimulated by our disagreements than our agreements. It's been great. But we're at an hour, and I just want to make sure we bring in Elon Musk, who has been weirdly absent from this conversation.
Dubious family that man has. Dubious family, I'll tell you.
So we're talking
you want to talk about family being able to raise a family and having a good family culture. The dude is just knocking out children once a week. How many does he what is he up to now? 15, 16?
I can find
out. The guy's
a
breeder. He's got a breeding kink.
Kids.
Yeah,
you want to talk to me about this guy has
He's Genghis Khan. He's modern day Genghis Khan.
He has 12 children. But even more so than that, we're talking about the value of education. People have pointed out that there is this dissonance between Elon Musk being someone who is arguing in the context of the H1-B visa fight.
Crony capitalism and Elon Musk. And by the way, when we cut him off, he went begging the CCP, and that's why they have the joint venture in Shanghai, the Tesla, which is 100% of his value, right? This guy lives on government contracts and taxpayer subsidies, okay? It's all, we're going to get Joe Allen in here for a second to transform it. Elon Musk, once again, brother, I'm smart enough to tell you no to your face, and I'm evil enough to be able to expose you as a running dog for the greatest enemy this nation's ever had. You're a war profiteer. You're sleeping with the enemy, brother, and you've been doing it because you're not an American nationalist. You're not even an American. All you are is a globalist, okay? A globalist. And you will go where anybody writes you a check, and you would take it from Adolf Hitler himself, because you're taking it from people that are as bad as Adolf Hitler. The murderous regime of the Chinese Communist Party, which you praised on their 100th anniversary. Let me bring it.
You know, the Americans aren't educated enough. There's not enough people in the workforce. Americans are basically just too stupid to get these jobs. And at the same time, people pointed out that he gave a talk, I think in October, in which he said college is overrated. He said, I think the value of a college education is somewhat overweighted. Too many people spend 4 years and accumulate a ton of debt and don't have useful skills. Well, the tech sector is pushing back, saying we are here, we do have the skills. This is really just a scam to underpay us. Moreover, and this is the really juicy bit about what Elon is saying right now. So there was a Twitter Spaces in which this gentleman participated, who people argue is in fact Elon Musk with a voice changing device that is not doing very much to change his voice, right? What did you say, Q?
Adrian Dutman.
Adrian Dutman. Okay.
Yeah.
And in the context of this Adrian fellow, whether or not he's Elon Musk, becomes increasingly exasperated at the anti H1-B argument that's being made, that it's also a racist argument that is like explicitly saying that Indians are culturally deficient and that's why they should not be coming over. And in the course of this, Elon starts saying like, that's racist. You can't say that. That's racist. We'll insert the clip here.
And ironically enough, some elements of the extreme legacy MAGA movement will have to deal with it as well. Because that's how it is. And don't hate the fucking big tech bros. Because out of all of them, Elon is the only one that's giving all of these crackheads a fucking voice. I want you to try and pull that shit on fucking Facebook and see how long you last. You ungrateful motherfuckers, seriously. You keep crying censorship this, censorship that. You're not censored. Your takes just suck. Get over it, and get over yourselves. Honestly. I'm not an enemy of anyone, but if you hate me for saying this, so fucking be it. I don't care. I'm part of what's new. You get to make that choice yourself. Do better. Anyways, thank you all for coming today.
But even if you don't believe that that is Elon Musk, which it's worth noting that I think his daughter popped up on Twitter saying that she believes that it's Elon Musk, but that's neither here nor there. Elon Musk tweeted the following a few days ago. Again, expressing this exasperation at this racism. Who allowed all this racism on the app? He says, the reason I'm in America, along with so many critical people who built SpaceX, Tesla, and hundreds of other companies that made America strong, is because of H1-B. Take a big step back and fuck yourself in the face. I will go to war on this issue, the likes of which you can not possibly comprehend. He went on to tweet, yes, and those contemptible fools, the people who disagree with him, must be removed from the Republican Party root and stem. Going on to say elsewhere that he believes that the arguments that are being made are in fact racist. What is happening? Is this more of the woke right?
You're going to go to war with Americans? Is what you're going to go to war with born Americans on the issue of whether people from other countries should be able to essentially undercut American jobs. You're going to do that. You're going to kick Americans out of the Republican Party. I mean, have fun with that.
And this is what, like, obviously I don't actually know, is Elon Musk an American citizen or not? But Vivek obviously
he is, because he voted. He voted. Remember, he talked about voting in South Texas, so he is a citizen now.
Right. So, like, I'm not here to impugn someone's, like, Americanness on the basis of how, like, recently they became a citizen or whether or not they're first generation or, like, that's not really my bag.
You should do that. You know, I'm sorry to say it, but
that's the thing that's left out of this conversation is Democrats are like full on globalism these days. You know, Bernie used to criticize the H1B program. He used to be one of his biggest causes.
760 H1B visas, and the list goes on and on. It's IBM, it's Citigroup, companies bringing in foreign professional workers at the same time they're laying off American workers.
Now he's not saying anything while all this is happening, right?
Well,
like now it's racist. Now it's racist if you say anything against immigration at all to a lot of people on the left, which is just crazy to me.
I'm sorry. This is one of my more reactionary positions, if you want to call it that. But if you've been born in a country and you've lived there your whole life, you've been working there your whole life, and then somebody just got here last year or the year before that, and they want to start to argue and dictate to you what life should be like in the country that you grew up in, I'm sorry, but you should be allowed to say, bro, you just fucking got here. Like, sorry, that's not the way it works. You're allowed to do that.
Again, I would say that less for Vivek and more so, obviously, for Elon. But just the point I was going to make is just that, like, while you are obviously American, if you're American, you're American. I'm not interested in playing that particular game. But again, this is what was so provocative, I think, to so many folks. And these America First arguments suddenly having to be deployed to protect the kind of inherent value of American culture vis-a-vis a brown foreign other. As a Black American, again, I can't help it. It's so good. Someone the other day, I had made this point, like someone had made this argument that basically American protectionism is legitimate, like you're allowed to want to have a cultural identity, and making it not from a right perspective, but just like generalized. I think this person was maybe even a leftist. And I quote tweeted and said, and yes, what if I made that argument and on top of that pointed out that as a Black American, descendant of North American slavery, whose relatives fought, and not just, I think he had evoked World War II. I said, what if they fought in the Civil War, as I have documentation that relatives on both sides of my family did? Don't I have priority? And what does that mean for me vis-a-vis the 20 million European Americans that immigrated to this country between like 1890 and 1920?
So
right?
You're arguing from FBA perspective. That's fucking awesome.
And the ADOS
Brianna said hashtag lineage, baby.
Lineage matters.
ADOS was in my
fuck that
mentions.
ADOS.
I think lineage matters, especially for Black people, because like the United States government did things to Black families that need to be atoned with, and they're still like lineage matters. And if the woke right gets us to understand that lineage matters, then that's fine. I'll take it. I like a woke right. I like a woke, and I like a protectionist right, because we need to talk about, look, who's going to decide our border policies? Is it going to be, tech industrialists, or is it going to be the federal government? And who decides what merits being an American? Is it someone who's good for the bottom line of a particular industry, or is it going to be a nation that decides what's good for our nation? So I think these are conversations that we should have. I wish they were happening in the Democratic Party.
I think that's a good point. And I'll put a clip of this in what I'm about to describe. But I did see, I think, Simone Sanders and Michael Steele on a panel talking about this.
America is a land of the free, home of the brave, all that good stuff that Elon Musk was tweeting about. However, please don't come for Americans. And I would like, let's be very clear, I would like white Americans to stand up. This is your calling card, honey. Where's your banner? Because they coming for you. They said y'all white and lazy. That's crazy.
Well,
that's
what
crazy.
I
and
find
if
is
I said
interesting.
It, y'all would be coming for me.
Well,
I would never say that because that's insane.
That's the point. What you have happening here is the very thing that white folks have said about Black people.
I'm sorry. I just want to know, Vivek was born in the U.S.
For generations. Vivek is now saying about white people, and they don't like it for some reason. Oh, y'all not lazy. Y'all not slow. Y'all not stupid. Well, that's what we've been saying for 400 years, and yet here we are. You still want to not read our history or go through our CRTs and all this
This is
stuff.
why the great Reverend Jesse Jackson talked about the Rainbow Coalition, honey, and people were uniting across working class, okay? And Black people and white folks and Latino folks coming together, because the rich people, they're not here for you, and this is how they letting you know, okay? They just let you know. So you want to come on over to the Rainbow Coalition, you come join us, right?
And it's weird how this is uniting folks. This Michael Steele, obviously a never Trump Republican who's a mainstay on MSNBC, and Simone Sanders kind of like reveling in this controversy and making the point that, like, yeah, white Americans are finally getting a taste of what Black Americans have been experiencing in terms of being framed as like categorically undeserving and unqualified for positions, which should be yours as some kind of baseline level of work and employment and living standards should be yours as a basis of being a member of a country and a community. That argument people seem not to be able to recognize for Black folks, but it's like very visible for white people. And so they're like joking about it. But the question is like, what's next? Like, what do you do with that? Are we just reveling in the inconsistencies of the right? Are we making a bid to actually make an argument for a social program that will actually be to the benefit of American citizens, regardless of race, period?
So I think you need to be more specific. I think you need to be more specific than this. And this is why I think Zed and I will kind of like, it gets interesting, because what does a social program look like? I don't think Democrats and the left especially knows how to think about social programs.
Free public colleges.
Don't marginalize families.
Free public
I think
colleges,
there's
universal
I think there's
healthcare.
one. No, I think there's. I mean, sure, but I mean these are issues that have been like chewed on and fought over for nigh on a century now. I think you can implement very quick policy fixes to take away the incentives to undercut labor. For example, like in Canada up here, we just squashed a postal strike. So the entire postal service for the entire country. It's cost me money. It cost a whole lot of people money, but people were in support of postal workers until the Liberal government essentially ordered them all back to work because the Department or the Ministry of Labor has the power to do that. So the issue is, well, how then do you avoid future postal strikes? How do you avoid this thing happening where there is a strike, it drags on, and then the postal service management can essentially just let it drag out until mom and pop government orders everyone back to work? Well, here's a simple fix. If that's what has to happen, if the federal government has to order employees back to work, then the entire board of directors gets fired. You guys are all out. We're going to replace you with a new board of directors. And I think the same thing can apply in the United States, where if you have workplaces that are replacing American workers with H1-B holders, you should essentially have to explain why it is that you laid off your American workforce, or else you lose government contracts. Or even, more radical, and a lot of people wouldn't like this, if you're going to sponsor H1-B holders, you're going to be financially responsible for them for X amount of years. Or even you're going to put them on the fast track towards getting a green card. Like, there are policy fixes that can be implemented to stop basically the bottom being sawn out of the labor market. But we're talking about, I think, some rather large and grandiose solutions that simply won't get fixed.
Yeah.
We'll be lucky if they get fixed within our lifetime, but there are policy measures directly tied to this exact problem that you can implement, but nobody's talking about them because we're talking about these vague ideas about, say, free college and universal health care and so forth. But to address the issue directly, you have to tie a policy. It is vague.
I don't disagree with you, Q, but I also think that when you're having people openly argue, wait a minute, but I think when you have people openly arguing that the reason that American workers are less competitive is because they have enormous student debt burdens, that's not an attenuated factor in the ability to exploit foreign labor. Like, that is
sure, but if you cancel student debt, what does that do about the fact that there is essentially a foreign labor force that's being imported into the United States to undercut American labor?
Well, I didn't actually start with cancel foreign debt. I said free public colleges and universities. You should be able to get the same qualification that the Indian immigrant has without having, $160,000.
But the qualification doesn't matter. It's because it's not the qualification. It's the fact that they can pay them less. That's why they prefer them. They can pay them less and then tie their personhood in the United States.
And they have lower standards on working, right? They'll work more hours, and we want ideally that to not be the case, but
if everybody has the exact same credentials, as it stands right now, American companies have a higher incentive to hire H1-B foreign workers because of the factors that Zaid just mentioned. That they're going to work less hours, they're not going to demand labor rights, they'll put up with a lot of shit that American workers won't.
All of that is true, but part of the reason why they're able to take less money is because they have less debt. I'm sorry, I'm experiencing this right now as the person who has free from their student debt for the first time in a lot of years. And the reason that I'm not scrambling in a panic from after losing my job at the Hill is because I'm not paying $2,300 a month for the first time since I was 25 years old. That makes a huge difference in terms of the kind of salaries you can take. I wanted to leave a long time ago.
Like
I couldn't.
Negro.
I'm sorry,
she's emancipated. Her chains are gone.
It's true, I am. And if I were unburdened from my healthcare burden to paying my own health insurance at $1,000 plus a month,
well,
that
those
would be
are all.
freer.
I agree with Brianna. Like, universal healthcare would be transformative for America. I don't really see what it would have to do with inequality of competition, though. Like, okay, we have universal healthcare. It doesn't mean that our workers are going to work harder than Indians, or that they're going to do better on tests than not really related.
I do think the healthcare point is more attenuated. Although I do think the question of can you leave your job? Do you have the same mobility as an American worker? Is of course linked to your healthcare. I'm sorry, I was previously engaged to an H1 visa holder from Canada, a Black Caribbean Canadian guy, and it was a big stressor for him when he wanted to look for a new job, when he was really unhappy at his workplace, he had to find someone else who was going to sponsor him. And it kept him in like a relatively low paying job compared to the one that he ultimately got for like a long time more than I think he would have if he weren't so risk averse because of his visa status. Now, again, he was going to have to go back home to Toronto. It wasn't like the biggest deal in the world, but it constrains your choices, I think, in meaningful ways. That's all I'm saying.
So what do we think about guild
Black
structures?
Canadian H1-B holder from Toronto who's Caribbean. Were you engaged to one of my cousins or something?
We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it offline.
So what about a guild structure for the H1B holders, right? So maybe you can only get it if it's a unionized industry. And that means we need to actually start talking about,
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we need to start talking about a guild for engineers, and that way might solve our problems in some way.
It strikes me that this is very similar to a conversation that we have about lower income workers when we're talking about the border crisis and stuff like that. Like, people listening to this podcast know that I'm open borders sympathetic. Like, I understand the negative implications for the American labor force, as we've been talking about this entire episode. But from a moral perspective, I don't think that there's an argument for why we can resource hoard. Why, if there's a drought or violence or someone trying to flee their life, their lives being ended in another part of the world, that we can just say no. Okay. So to me, the way that you get around that is to make it so that people who come to America have the same privileges, benefits, and costs that are associated with hiring an American worker. And then you have the double benefit of actually treating people well and treating people equally, and also not incentivizing American employers from privileging foreign workers over American workers. I would be much more inclined to a program of giving foreign people more rights to make them less of a competitive advantage over Americans than simply trying to wall us off from the rest of the world.
But that would be walling us off, though. That would be walling us off, though. These tech bros would not want the foreign workers anymore if we priced them out, right?
Yeah.
So it would effectively be walling them out, though. Like, we would be. I think, Brianna, part of the problem here is the same thing happened to you that happened to Bernie after Ezra Klein and Dylan Matthews and Hillary Clinton attacked him, which is that Bernie stopped talking about nationalism. Like, Bernie was like, okay, I can't say anything against immigration because that's racist.
Wait a minute. How is that the case? I'm literally sitting here agreeing with all of your substantive points, but also saying that I don't think that there is a moral right to say some Guatemalan family crossing the border has to stop at a wall when there are actually resources.
But you did kind of say that. You did kind of say that, though, because you're trying to price them out now. You're trying to say
I'm not trying to price them out. I'm trying to make the point that it's being stubbornly refused. Wait a minute, Zed. I'm trying to make the point that's being stubbornly refused by everybody on the panel. You are all, maybe not you, Q, but for the most part, you're buying into the idea that this is a zero-sum game without at all acknowledging the wealth hoarding that's being done by people like Elon Musk, who are pretending that they have to cut cost and hire these foreign workers, or that these foreign workers aren't really about a cost-saving measure, but in fact about their superior intellect or worth ethic and these kind of things, when ultimately it is a Ponzi scheme to enable them to get that much more rich. This is a trillionaire. He's about to be, a trillionaire in 2025, they're saying, our first minted one. And at no point are we challenging the supposition that there isn't more pie to go around.
Well, open borders is a Koch brothers scheme. I mean, Bernie said it himself. I couldn't say it any better.
You take global poverty that seriously. It leads you to conclusions that in the U.S. are considered out of political bounds. Things like sharply raising the level of immigration we permit, even up to a level of open borders, about sharply increasing
open borders.
Foreign aid.
That's a Koch brothers proposal. The
really?
idea, of course, I mean, that's a right-wing proposal which says essentially there is no United States.
But it would make a lot of the global poor richer, wouldn't it?
And it'd make everybody in America poor. Then you're doing away with the concept of a nation state. And I don't think there's any country in the world which believes in that. If you believe in a nation state, or in a country called the United States, or UK, or Denmark, or any other country, you have an obligation, in my view, to do everything we can to help poor people. What right-wing people in this country would love is an open border policy. Bring in all kinds of people who work for $2 or $3 an hour. That would be great for them. I don't believe in that. I think we have to raise wages in this country. I think we have to do everything that we can to create the millions of jobs.
He said it himself.
Again, the idea of importing foreign workers to undercut American labor force is a Koch brothers scheme, but that presumes a whole host of defaults with respect to how we as a country relate to the rest of the world in terms of sanctions regimes, in terms of our environmental policies, in terms of the wars that we fight.
That's also how
all of these kinds of things.
But that's also how labor unions work, right? Like a labor union works. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. You're right.
Yeah, I want borders because I want some sort of cultural control over the United States. I don't want to bring a bunch of people here who hate unions. Like, I don't want to bring a bunch of people here who don't want to hear about any historical injustice that's done to black people. I don't want to, they don't want to hear about reparations. They don't want to hear about unions, but they're very good workers. We should let them in, or they have a traumatic story in their home country, so we should let them in. I don't want them here if they're going to screw up my cultural project for American democracy and the things I think we need for us to be a self-governing nation. So it's not just a financial incentive.
Well, good luck with that, Irami, because they're already here. And as the
the thing is, you can slow it down, though. You can slow down the pace of immigration to the United States.
No, it's already happened. I'm sorry, it happened after the Civil War. I'm sorry, this is me, Ados Queen. I'm going to do it. It happened when, after the Civil War, at which point Black Americans were 14% of the population, they let in 20 million white Europeans, pushing our percentage, our demographic percentage down, who immediately got all the. More or less immediately. I know wages of whiteness, blah, blah, blah.
No. They got it immediately. You can say it.
Vis-a-vis Black Americans, they got privileges immediately. Vis-a-vis WASPs, whatever, it took a little bit of time. But we're able to benefit from the American dream in the way that we weren't. And so it is, I'm sorry, it's a little bit rich for me to be hearing all of these arguments now, and the white people kvetching and tearing their hair out and resting their garments, because it already happened to us. And there's a part of me that, it's not going to happen, but would like to see it be the case, that they have some recognition that they should be having solidarity with the rest of us who've been ringing this bell for a very long time, and have an approach that expands the social safety net in the way that they had it and the way that they said that they liked it in the 1960s, but which was closed off at the very point in American history when Black Americans were finally legally obligated to be part of the social bargain because of the civil rights movement.
You know what I think, Brianna, and this is where I think you and I are going to part ways on this. If the border was
come on, man.
I'm sorry.
I'm
trying my best here, but I think we're going to have to part ways here. If the border was closed tomorrow, this is actually why when the Supreme Court basically gutted affirmative action, I was a little bit giddy about it, because I was like, oh, okay, you all just wait, because the idea that affirmative action has primarily benefited Black people in America.
Oh, I agree. I agree with this.
It's mostly a canard. It is mostly a canard, right? We know that.
I agree with
But the thing is, that lie persists for as long as affirmative action exists. Now that affirmative action has essentially just been like drowned in a bathtub, people are now going to be forced to contend with the fact that there is massive inequality in the United States. It's highly predicated on a racial level, but it is also highly predicated on a class level. Not just like people of the same class get to succeed, but people of the upper class will cut the knees off of anybody in the middle and lower classes, as long as they can get somebody to work cheaper. And I think this is the first big crack in the dam that we've seen as a result of that. You can no longer point to affirmative action and say, well, this is the reason why these conditions exist. I saw Elon Musk the other day on Twitter, himself and Vivek, and everyone is now like circling back to DEI and affirmative action and saying, yeah, we need to get rid of affirmative action programs.
Remember, we hate the other Americans. Black and brown Americans. Don't forget, we're on your side.
Guys, that's over now. How much longer can you talk about this? That's over now. So you no longer have any excuses. So if the border was, if there was like an actual solid concrete wall all across the southern border in the United States and the northern border as well, so that us Canadians can't come down and take your jobs either, what people would be forced to reckon with is like, there is actually a massive inequality happening here, and there's no more people that are able to come in and feed this inequality by undercutting the labor force. We're all going to have to sit down and actually work this out. And I think that, and this is not me trying to be an accelerationist, this is just me looking at conditions as they exist. And the one thing that I think is stopping Americans from reckoning with these massive class differences in interest is the fact that there is an immigrant workforce that can come in and stop the problem from being resolved on its own, rather than have the problem being resolved through this racially coded language where we think that every single person that's coming into America is some sort of war-torn or economic refugee that's only squeezing in because conditions have been absolutely shattered in their home country, and that is just not the character of the vast majority of H-1B holders.
Yeah, for sure.
There's a class inequality that's doing a lot of work that we can deal with, but we're going to see that there was a cultural inequality, because while the boogeyman was always black people taking the white people's jobs, the spots at Harvard and the spots at Berkeley and the spots at Yale, like, those were going to Asian people on merit because they were scoring better on the tests and doing better in school and doing the things
I don't know.
they were supposed to do.
Post-affirmative action, Asian enrollment at Yale and Princeton is
Going
down.
Yeah.
Oops.
Well,
Sorry,
at some
y'all.
schools is also
When I-
up,
when I
right?
know-
they're all
I
competing
saw
for the
that.
same
It's
pool.
up, Zed. Some schools it's
There-
up. Harvard's is the same. It's a
It
was a white-
it,
saw that-
it
I saw
doesn't
that
even
article
matter
as
that
well.
much.
I
Like you
laughed my
got, you went
ass
to
off.
Harvard. I don't care who goes to Harvard. Like how big is their opening
I
class,
do.
right? It's like,
I do, and you should.
yeah, because
too,
you're like,
there's-
because you're an elite, and I don't give
No,
a shit
I
about
care because-
Harvard.
No, Zed,
I
I,
live in
care
Atlanta,
because
man.
I know. Wait, let me say this again, because I know how much I'm advantaged by it, and I know how much you don't stand a chance. I applied for jobs that only interview people who went to Ivy League schools. I was able, as a paralegal coming out of law school.
Yeah, but
To earn
Brianna,
almost-
why
wait
do
a
you?
minute, wait a minute,
But
wait a minute. Let
Brianna,
me finish
why?
this, Zed. Wait a
Why
minute,
don't you want to
wait a
get rid of
minute.
this system?
Zed,
Why do we have to care who
Zed.
goes to Harvard?
Zed, let me just finish
Why
this
should we
point.
only hire Harvard grads? I'm asking a
Zed,
real question.
I'm literally making the opposite point. If you let me finish the point, Zed.
Okay,
I'm
sorry,
literally making the opposite point.
Okay.
Because I know that the current system privileges people like me so disproportionately, and that I, as a paralegal, was able to earn almost six figures as a 25-year-old right out of, or 26, whatever. Out of college. As a paralegal out of college at age 21, I was able to earn almost six figures because I was hired by a law firm that exclusively hired people that went to Harvard, Yale, not Princeton, for reasons that I can explain elsewhere, but Ivy League schools. They wanted people, because Princeton didn't have a law school, and they had a whole little thing going with, it's not important. The point is,
Isn't that the problem?
that is deeply unfair. And there are people who are like paying out the nose to go to excellent schools like BU who are not going to be able to have these opportunities. They think if they grind harder. No,
Wait.
it's not about the grind.
No. This is not the right way to think about inequality in America. If you go to BU or you go to Harvard, you're going to live long and be rich. Either one, it doesn't matter. This is an extremely elitist conversation. I cannot allow that.
Why do you have to go to
I cannot
Harvard?
allow that to fly. That just is such a distortion of inequality in America to talk about BU versus Harvard. I'm laughing at this.
Of course, it's an elitist
I'm
conversation,
laughing.
but the point that is exactly why we shouldn't have Harvard. That is exactly why we shouldn't have Harvard.
Exactly. Why should we even have
that there's
this school?
wait a minute, Zed. The idea that these granulations exist and matter, and that there are people when you look at the Supreme Court,
They don't matter.
Every,
They don't
wait
matter.
a minute.
The
When you look
fact
at the
that
Supreme Court, it's
look
that
at
every single
Baltimore
member
schools.
went to
Look at
Harvard or
Baltimore
Yale.
schools. Look at Baltimore schools. If one child from Baltimore in one of those terrible schools where not a single child reads on grade level goes to BU, their life is set, right? I'm talking about the people who are really disadvantaged, and we're talking about the variations of rich people. And I'm like, who cares, man? This is what the left is now, variations of rich people, the new rich, the old rich.
If that's what you want to take away as a takeaway, then I will let you live with that belief. I think everyone else understands the argument.
Irami and I are talking
The
about
broader
people who live
argument
under
that's being
systemic
made.
poverty, who live with gun violence, who live with drug dealers all around them, who live
The
in
words
broken
gun
homes.
and violence have
Those
not
are
yet
the
once been
people.
said on this podcast, but you are opportunistically trying to pretend that you are somehow more salt of the earth, man of the people than someone like me, who you will selectively ignore, explain that she is a that she is the daughter of a first-generation college graduate whose family dynamics you have no sense about whatsoever. So that I'm going to let you go.
I'm arguing that we need to pay
I'm
attention
gonna
to
let
the
you
poorest
go.
people in America. That's all I'm arguing.
Of course
not
we
the richest
should,
people.
which is why I'm the only person who's been persistently saying that free public education needs to be top of the list. While you're, I don't know, making some kind of argument about something, that is something that has come up on this podcast that I've said repeatedly, unlike this gun violence point, which is being opportunistically raised in the 11th hour, 90 minutes into this conversation. That being said, Zed, I really do appreciate you being here. I am stimulated by all of the angles that all three of you bring to the table. This is exactly what I had hoped when I corralled this alphabet soup of names to come and talk about this particular subject. And I'm really grateful to you all for spending so much time with us here today.
Can I say one thing?
Go ahead, Q. Yeah.
I also noticed that you didn't have any white males on this panel, and as a point, I have to raise the fact that you actually had an incredibly non-diverse panel, and this is white man erasure. I'm not happy with it.
That's
He was
fair
right.
enough.
We have to check our privilege.
Look, I will consider having more white podcast bros on this podcast going forward. I know that there's a real paucity of them in the field, and I'll do better. Actually, though, I did want to have some women on the podcast. If you're a woman who wants to come on and talk about this tech angle, actually, I would really enjoy that. So hit me up in the DMs. You guys, where can people find more of you and your work on the internet and beyond? Let's start with you, Zaid.
Yeah. So, I have a Twitter presence where I post my stuff because of when I freelance places, but I also have a newsletter on Substack, The American Saga. Just did a big story about autism pseudoscience that's exploding right now. And I was very happy to talk. I was very happy to be talking about something that wasn't related to autism for once this week. So thank you, Brianna.
Anytime, Zaid. That people do go look at that. I saw that you were following that. What is the podcast about telepathy and autism? Oh, yeah. That looks really fascinating. So check it out. It is very
fascinating. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to go in reverse alphabetical order through this alphabet soup. Q. What's up with you? Where can people find you on the internet and beyond?
Yeah, so there's my Substack, theculture.org. I'm actually coming out with the project in January 2025, the strategy of tension, where I'll be looking at essentially how the ruling class is able to pit people against one another. So that should be out by mid to the end of January 2025.
Okay, excellent. And Irami, where can people find you?
I have a YouTube channel, thefunkyacademic.com. I do a show probably 3 times a week. And also I'm working on a large project on no-fault divorce as a form of child abuse and how we need to rethink of how we think of, it's so popular that it's gotten me a lot of special kind of feedback because nobody talks about no-fault divorce as child abuse, but it is. And we just don't know how to talk about it. But I'm helping you with that language a few times a week on my show on YouTube, Funky Academic.
Irami, nobody's takes are hotter. Nobody's takes are harder than yours.
I'm not wrong.
Masterful work.
I'm not wrong. Yeah, no fault divorce.
Why are you booing? I'm right.
Okay,
you
I'm right.
a walking meme.
I am helping Americans with their deficient culture. Sold a bill of goods, and it's confusing children and their agency in ways that we don't know how to talk about. Except I do, and I will help you not screw up your family life and squander your kids on my channel, Funky Academic on YouTube.
All right. Well, if you want to know how to save America, do follow Irami over at the Funky Academic on YouTube. If you want more Bad Faith every week, you can subscribe at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast and get all the back episodes there, as well as an additional Monday episode that drops every week. Additionally, for our Christmas time Thursday episode, we did not have a new episode, but we did unlock our, I think, 2-hour plus debate with Michael Eric Dyson, which was one of the most talked about episodes of the year. So if you haven't gone back and listened to that in full, you absolutely should. I'll also unlock the video. I think I forgot to do that on YouTube as well. So go over to Bad Faith Podcast, subscribe to the YouTube channel so you don't miss drops like that going forward. As always, take care of yourselves and remember to keep the faith. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.